Welcome to the ThinkData Podcast. And today on the show, I'm joined by Lily. She is the co-founder of Waterlily, and they are an AI platform helping people plan and prepare for long-term care. Super interesting backstory to this. And we're going to dive into why she started Waterlily, how she validated that demand early on, and really how to cut through all of this noise associated with AI at the moment. And also an interesting take on this, what it's like to actually build a company with her partner, Evan, and the lessons she learned as a first-time founder. As I mentioned, Lily, it's been I think a couple of months ago we spoke. It's good to have you on finally, but really interesting backstory to the business. So do you mind kind of for the listeners here to kind of bring us up to speed with you? Because I know you started life a few years back, obviously as an intern at NASA, quite technical. You've obviously worked through product growth. You're now a first-time founder. So yeah, over to you.
Yeah, it's actually really wonderful to be here. And I got the hint of what you're saying as well. There's two essentially backstories to Waterlily. There's one of the initial founding story as a solo founder, and then when my co-founder came in, and some really interesting learnings there.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Waterlily, just a light touch on what you just mentioned about how we use AI to help families plan and prepare for long-term care. Essentially, what we do is we predict what that event is going to look like for any individual sitting in front of us, and learning what that cost, as well as how much of that care burden is going to fall on family members. And it's a very expensive event. I learned it early on. It was not my goal to found Waterlily when I was 5 years old. It was actually my goal when I was 5 years old to become one of the youngest aerospace engineers. And
Wow.
when I was 11, I entered into a national competition. I was a part of a NASA Explorer School, and I ended up winning that competition. They loved the idea so much they flew me out to the Kennedy Space Center, and from there I was given the stepping stones from 12 to 16 to essentially work at JPL NASA's robotics side of things, and that was really fascinating. I took on a mentor
Wow.
that was the head of a department, etc. So I was really fast track there. I went to college early at 14 for it as well, and so that's what I thought my trajectory was going to be. It's going to be awesome. But when I was, of course, life happens. And
Mm,
for me, my aunt, who was a really integral part of our first generation immigrant family, she was diagnosed with terminal stage colon cancer.
okay.
And what came with that was a level of frailness that we see with our aging parents and our aging
Mm,
grandparents, which is she couldn't do basic daily tasks such as bathing, dressing, eating, toiling by herself. And so we had to take on a lot of that burden at the home, and we had full-time jobs, full-time going to school, and we would have really benefited from getting more professional help outside. And we were really deeply surprised that health insurance wouldn't step in to help us take care of these costs and the care that we needed for her. And so it was really financially devastating for us and nearly bankrupt
mhm.
us to navigate this.
Wow.
It emotionally bankrupt our relationships as well, just navigating all these high stakes decisions. We haven't spoken to our entire extended side of our family as a result in over a decade since that happened. And so that was the
Wow.
founding story of Waterlily, was empathizing with that level of devastation that not only I experienced, but realizing statistically it's a massive space. Every single
Mm.
household on average in the US is going to go through a serious form of long-term care event, and we just can't afford it.
It's amazing backstory. I always think the best founders and the best products are born out of a personal drive and a personal situation or life event that really kind of spurs them on. Certainly in the harder times. I think when you're growing any business, you have to take it back to the reason you do it, the why, I guess. And when you looked at Waterlily as a fascinating backstory with kind of the NASA journey, when as a first time founder, how did you approach building Waterlily? Because I think when we spoke offline before, you've had some really good mentors, you've had some really kind of great support structures around you, certainly when you were on your own as the CEO. But talk to me about that kind of validating of demand, the kind of, you've got a great idea, there's a personal driver here, but how do you then turn Waterlily into a business?
I think that's a very fantastic question. So if I reflect back to when I was building out this company, first and foremost, my drive wasn't to build a company. My drive was to honestly hate the problem so much that I wanted to understand, why is this pain point still here in some shape or form? And I like to kind of approach things from first principles. So I was trying to understand, why is it so financially devastating to navigate it? Why is it so emotionally devastating. Like the first thing you do is you want to make sure that this isn't a problem you're solving just for yourself. You actually want to know how big the market is. And so I spent a lot of cycles early on talking to as many families as I could. I talked to hundreds of families, and that created the first idea, to be honest, for Waterlily, which is navigating the devastation in real time, because a lot of families wanted to pay me a bunch of money to help them navigate that complexity in real time. And I was also lucky to not only understand the family experience, but I also want to understand what were the businesses that they were interacting with as well. Because I've learned that DTC businesses are really hard to build out for a variety of reasons we could always dive into. Ideally, in order to build a sustainable business, you want to see if there's a B2B angle. Who's going to pay for this at the end of the day? And so that's where I leaned on a lot of our existing investors who had really great relationships in the age tech space, and not only the entrepreneurs, but also like leaders within major companies such as carriers or health providers or et cetera. And so I did a ton of those interviews in parallel so I could understand what is the ultimate end user that I want to empathize with, but what is
Mm,
the ultimate business cycles that I want the kind of company to take on. And so what was interesting is I was like, I want this to be a B2B business, but why are these consumers paying me money up front? Of course, you ask, like, if I built this, would you pay for it? And you build out that vaporware, for example.
yeah.
It
Yeah.
would like this, and you get the prepayments. So that's just natural best practice. I got a lot of prepayments from families, so much so that a lot of my investors, those that were trained by some of the top VCs, whether it's like 𝐾𝐨𝐧'𝐭 or Founders Fund and some of the founding partners there, they said, this is really special. I've not got anyone, I've not seen very many companies where the users immediately want to pay you for vaporware to really solve this, and it's a pain point.
Interesting.
And so I could have gone there, but I didn't actually. I
Yeah.
got yelled at essentially our from many of our investors that from first principles, if they want to pay for it, you go and build it and you iterate from there. But I took a step back and really thought about the business from continuing from first principles, and realized that the margins for building out a DTC business will not hurt me today, but it's probably going to hurt me about 2 years from now.
Yeah, I think it's really, really smart move. I think when you look at those, there's so much hype around. You obviously touched on a real need in the product. Obviously, there was a demand for the product, hence why so many people were willing to part with their money. But obviously, when you put AI in the middle of any kind of product or concept, obviously, a lot of investors get very excitable about it. A lot of kind of partners that, well, we must back this, but equally, it has to be a commercial business. So, talk to me about the product itself. So, from whether it's the AI element to it or just generally the product, how does it work, and what part does AI play in this?
Yeah, I kind of like to take a step back at and understand from an investor's eyes, why is AI a hype? Like, why do they care about AI so much? What about it affects the fundamental business economics that make it really enticing to
Mm,
invest? And so when I think of AI, there's kind of use cases that I personally feel very fascinated by. The first one is personalization. And so when you're able to tell someone's story in some shape or form, or to be able to give them advice or guidance that's really particular to their situation, it feels really special. I think that
mm,
that makes the experience a lot more sticky, especially in situations where the conversation or the topic would otherwise have been really hard. And the second piece that Lily touches on is AI that helps streamline or automate a lot of mundane kind of manual tasks that usually human labor would be very expensive to do it, and margins would otherwise be very laser thin. And so can you use AI to kind of automate a lot of human tasks, then the margins become really big again. So not only the personalization, I think, opens, I would say, like, creates really healthy kind of customer acquisition costs like LTV, et cetera, fundamental metrics there.
mm.
But when you think about automating things, then you create higher margin. And for Waterloo, we did a bit of both, actually.
Okay. Okay.
What I wanted to understand for first principles is, why are families struggling so much to navigate this topic and this complexity? Can you make it easier in some way for them? Can we address the problem earlier to affect sort of the financial compounding effect of this event?
Mm,
Two is two is, can you reduce a lot of the complexity that right now only humans could take on via like a phone call, and helping them navigate these things? And the answer is, you could do both of them. And so I think that's what ended up making the investors really interested, was that there's a space that has been largely untapped, and both major use cases of AI could actually be used here. Again, the devil's in the details though, but that's what made the story particularly interesting and why you're slapping on sort of a new, fresh coat to paint on a relatively old industry.
Yeah, look, so eloquently put in terms of the process behind that, and actually it goes back to your point where obviously it was your auntie. It wasn't necessarily just the financial implications of what happened, but the emotional impact. And actually, from an investor standpoint, if you can cover both from a business, it's also got the social element, but it's also got the financial element, then actually, and it's generally doing good as well. It's like, AI in healthcare, if it's the right use case, it's saving patients' lives or making patients' lives better, then ultimately with a good product or a technology stack around it, it's going to become more investable, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I will share we have a couple of friends that have, I would say, like become unicorns like in their respective fields in SF that we talk to them often. And it's so interesting. Usually when you have kind of validated your company's like ability, like a unicorn or a decacorn, there's usually a lot of really intense competition.
Mm,
And that's when you realize product excellence is not the most important thing
no.
at times. Is an ability, depending on your market, like your ability to close deals. And
Mhm.
sometimes it's a fundamentally different skill set than building out an incredible product. Like your North Star is built out that incredible product, but it was really fascinating to kind of like see it's just like you have to be technical, but also at the same time, you have to really know how to speak eloquently, make a good impression, and know how to work through kind of business
Mhm.
politics and dynamics. So that's I would say the real mover here is like you have a beautiful product, but if you don't know how to talk to people, you don't know how to get them to invest in your vision, then you're not going to have a big company.
Yeah, there's so many examples, isn't there, in recent times of great products and just has lost a lot of investment, or companies that have fallen over and the product's been great, but actually their go to market, the product market fit, the actually scaling revenue has obviously fallen by the wayside. And I do think this is probably an interesting point to bring in kind of Evan to the conversation, because obviously you obviously are partners who complement each other on a personal level, but in terms of knowing when it was the right time to bring someone in, specifically someone in that kind of partner co-founder dynamic, which I know when we first spoke, it was like, oh wow, that's a really interesting, kind of setup there. But how did you know A, it was the right time, and B, Evan was the right person?
I love that question because I believe a co-founder kind of like variable is probably one of the biggest telltales of whether or not the company is going to succeed or fail. You
Completely.
really minimize co-founder breakup. One is like I know that investors struggle to invest in solo founders, but also they want to know how good is your co-founder relationship, because if that breakup happens, then usually the company breaks up after that. What's unique about our case, which you alluded to, is Evan is my life partner. He was my life partner before I built out Waterlily, and he's also an exceptional founder. He essentially built his company for 6 years, exited it, and was mentored by some of the top voices, I would say, in the VC space. And he was also an early angel investor. So he wanted to start there. I thought that was perfect. He wanted to be supportive. He was not my major investor. That was the important thing, is like our lives are relatively
Yeah.
separate, and he didn't know how I'd be like running a business. And so he would give me light advice here and there. And of course, like I don't want to like I have my own way in which I want to build a company. And I've learned over time, over a couple of months, just as an investor, that he was really respectful to like I think he didn't mind pushing and being direct with like, I think this is the right move. What do you think, Lily? And I would share my thoughts, and he understood I operated from first principles. Like, that actually makes sense. And he took a step back and let me run the business. Then he started to, of course, like tinker on like other kind of startup ideas and use cases. And he specifically focused on an enterprise like SaaS go to market tool. And I thought it was fascinating. So I went ahead and adopted it. And that's how we worked more closely together, with him being more of a contractor to
Oh,
Water.
okay, interesting.
And so again, there's baby steps that are important here to actively de-risk sort of such an important decision. And I pushed really hard. I would say like, okay, I'm getting, 8 to 12 calls a day booked. Can we do that consistently? Or if it's messing up, like where in the metrics is something broken, and how are you
Mm.
that process? And he had no issue kind of going through the details with me. I know that sometimes there's a lot of ego when it comes to doing our work. And so he shared, no, very low ego. I'll let you peek underneath the hood. If you want to solve things with me, you think that's efficient, like we'll do it together. And we did end up creating better solutions together as a
Nice.
result. He had fantastic advice when it came to fundraising. And so it just became very natural. Then I realized that he really got to understand my business. He allowed me to run the company more effectively, more efficiently over several months. And that's why it made sense for us to become a co-founder. Now, managing that co-founder relationship is a different set of skills.
I was going to say, yeah, because it's always hard, isn't it? Because my wife and I, we run our own businesses, but we find ourselves always talking about work, and there's always that point to go, at what point do you stop? So with you and Evan, is there unspoken rule where you go, after 9 p.m. we're just not going to talk about work because it's always going to be at work, or is that really hard?
So I'll share kind of like a fun fact here, which is nearly every day we have to still work past like 9 p.m.
Yeah, cool.
That's just where we're at. However, if you're waking up at 6 a.m. and then you're going to sleep around 11 p.m. or 12 p.m. or 12 a.m. day in and day out, sometimes your brain gets really exhausted with the same concepts, especially when it comes to work. And so we took a trick. So after I would say 9 p.m., we call work mangoes. So I'm just like, oh, do you have mangoes that you need to get to today or something like that? And I think that helps us to kind of extend almost this marathon that we have to do every single day. So that's just a fun tip and trick. But because we work closely together, we have to make really hard decisions together. It's someone that's consulting with you. It's like, no, they're on the same roller coaster ride as you. They're going to have the same consequences. And so we don't really have much of a personal life. And it's because we put as our goal with each other is we see a lot of exceptionalness in each other. And we want our goal in this phase of our careers, how do you become the best possible founder you could possibly be? And we see a lot of our weaknesses and strengths. And so even when I'm exhausted, even when, we're not feeling particularly close to each other, I think we completely align on the fact that hey, above the relationship, it's more important that I want to be the best coach to you. That allows us to kind of stay on this marathon of focusing on the business and honestly putting the relationship in the backseat because that's what we've agreed upon.
Yeah, and I like that. It's that kind of it's that contract, isn't it? It's that it doesn't need to be necessarily written down, but it's that verbal contract of saying, "Are you good? Are you good?" Well, no, I like that. And I think, where are you in regards to the evolution of Waterlily? So what I mean by that is obviously, you've obviously got paying customers, you've got a lot of interest. That's obviously how I came across you guys. But where are you now in terms of the building phase? Because I'm guessing as you and Evan put in such long hours in every single day, 6-7 days a week, there needs to be that second, that third layer of hires or more investment in technology. So where are you now on the evolution of kind of growth?
I think that's a fantastic question. So for what it's worth, we've raised 2 rounds of funding. The first one's a pre-seed, and then about 2 years into that, we've raised our seed round. So
Fantastic.
Pre-seed, we raised $2.2 million to kind of really get a lay of the land, really understand the fundamentals of why is this space so broken, some validation, early MVP building, and that was when we built out the MVP product. Then we went through our seed round and we closed that, I would say, several months ago, last November, December at this point, which is an oversubscribed $7 million. And the core kind of thesis there is there is very much something here. When we went into our seed round, we already had 6 of some of the largest kind of logos in our space as customers doing pilots with us, and the fundamentals of the business made sense. So now it's about, in this phase, how do we go from closing more logos in a space, building out that distribution moats, and validating kind of the core, I would say economic benefits of actually using our product, and can we actually start to lightly touch on doing it in a really scalable way while building out your distribution and data moat. So in terms of where we are in growth, is we have some mature relationships that have been going on for a while, but at the same time, we've been building up awareness of our brand, so much so that additional kind of top carriers in the space, top wealth advisors, top distributors are actually coming to us. We actually do a couple of inbound calls every single day, and it ends up converting into a customer right now. So we are actively kind of building out our robust, I would say, operational processes to ensure that our core business model of are we helping these professionals be confident with taking on this conversation with these families? And is there a good ROI for them? Is it good for their practice? And we're seeing some really good data that, well, now how do we do it with more personas of these professionals? And more importantly, how do we understand other ways in which we can improve this family that we're following their trajectory? We're helping them with how do you potentially consider the right financial decision early on, But then the second half is once you're kind of at a long-term care event or you're on the precipice of it, are there other high risk factors that we can help double down on? And so that's some of the other major contracts we're closing in on this space is how do we capture that end-to-end family experience around long-term care and being the go-to trusted resource to guide that family. So there's pretty large fundamental, I think, economics there. So it's not just proving out the initial market of $500 billion space, but we might capture 10% of that market, for example.
Mm.
Then the product, is there additional distribution and data moats that we could be building out by extending sort of the use cases here? And so that's where we're building up additional validation. And I would say like closing more logos. I'll kind of pause and I'll share one thing, which is Evan still very much sees Waterlily with external investor eyes all the time. That's how we stay kind of like on track. And kind of leading into our next raise, that's where less so the vision and the team is important, but those are important. But now you need to prove out like what are the fundamental metrics at scale that you're able to kind of validate to kind of secure that next round of funding. What he shared is to me and to the team, he's like, I don't think you guys understand how absurd it is, how fast we're able to close deals in this space, how much people are aware of who you are, given how young you are. And more importantly, the way that we're getting feedback from these top industry leaders, it shows that we are not the industry leader. Like we may not be the industry leader because we're young. Like we've been commercial for a little over a year and a half, but folks are making bets on us, doing deals with us because we are almost like the secret industry leader, and it's
Yeah.
not yes yet until the next like year or two, and they want to take advantage of like stepping in there. So that's what he said. That's where he said there's something really fascinating, happening here.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that. It's like the quietly going about your business, the validation on product market fit in your TAM is the fact you're getting these calls, a couple of calls a day, you're converting them, investors, you're oversubscribed, people are coming to you. And I'm guessing as a first time founder, and I know you initially were the founder, on your own, and obviously you had Evan's support behind the scenes, but what's something you've kind of had to unlearn, once that company started to build? Because I'm guessing the evolution of a founder is two sides, isn't it? Getting the concept out, getting the messaging out, and then your role ultimately has to change in order to, on your point, if you're going to go to a Series A and start to raise and really grow. What have you had to unlearn, and how did you go about that?
I think that's a fascinating question around what did I have to unlearn? Because usually, with most founders, they've actually been in industry for a while and they've learned, oh, this is how you run a company from like, being there, and they have to unlearn that. I've honestly always kind of struggled with the businesses that I was a part of where I didn't see the fundamental economics making sense and the execution of the team wasn't making sense to me and whatnot. And so that's where I was just deeply dissatisfied with a lot of the teams and the way they operated in like my prior experiences. And I was almost curious and I was almost obsessed with other founders and why were they successful and what were they able to do. And something I had to like unlearn really quickly is my quirks. So I know that like I try to come off as normal as possible. Like sometimes I talk slower, sometimes I use more layman terms. Something I had to unlearn from what Silicon Valley teaches you is like if you're like kind of this quirky founder, a little bit neurotic, that's actually a really good thing. And I disagree with that strongly. I just
Interesting.
if you're going into enterprise SaaS, you're working with like these folks that had like who work in the Midwest or in the East Coast and went to different schools as you, like neuroticism isn't something that is like celebrated.
Mm,
Also, being a little passionate and bit of an a-hole is also not celebrated. There's a lot
no.
of things that we look at with in terms of like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, and others where they're really aggressive in ways where like, like I've had to like unlearn like I actually don't want those attributes. They
No.
succeeded in spite of having those attributes. And so if I have control over being an incredibly like reasonable person, like I would say not great, like not generous, but
Mm,
being a fair person, being
yeah.
someone that's trustful and incredibly smart, like show aptitude that there's no ceiling and really hard work ethic and show that like we need all of these things for it, then that's when things really started to work well for me. That's when the team, I would tell them like, hey, you're doing this wrong. It should be like this and you need to get it done like tomorrow and you're working your butt off, but I need you to work harder. And they're like, yes, ma'am, I'll go and do that. And Evan's just like, what is going on? How are you getting
Yeah.
people to kind of react in that way? Most people push back, and it's because those attributes really matter for first principles. Just like, what does it take to build out like an Olympic team? Like, you're building at the Olympic team for a business, and you want gold for your particular category. For
Mm.
us, long-term care. So how do you then train like an Olympic athlete? Like, how do you like intensely train? How do you make sure that you don't get over injured so that you don't burn out, bend over backwards? And how do you have intense rest period? Like, maybe like if it's one day on the weekend. So I just kind of operate from those first principles. One last thing is, something that was important for me to learn is like, oh, there's all these important learnings that I got founding the company, like during the pre-seed stage and the seed stage, that are going to compound, meaning like, how do you build out a team? Like, I think that is something that compounds. How you build out the team, what the team is going to look like in the future, but everything else about the business economics, how you fundraise, fundamentally different business. So you have to like put on the hat of, oh, I'm going to be running a completely different business 12 months from now, 18 months from now. Do I have space to kind of grow into that and recognize I'm going to be wrong again in about 12 months from now?
Yeah, well, look, there's no surprise the way you talk through it there, that you've had the successes you've had, and people are those loyal, the yes man, just going to get on with it. And you want everyone to be on the journey with you, don't you? Because ultimately you're an early stage startup. People are investing their time, their livelihood into you. They trust you. And, I agree. Those kind of narcissistic, sociopathic tech founders you read about, you think, really, does that work? But it obviously works for them. But you do you, and obviously with Evan's support and obviously the support of your team, I'm excited to see how Waterlily progress. And I'll make sure that when we go live, we'll obviously tag you guys. And I implore everyone who's listening here, if you're curious about Waterlily's products, have a look at the website. If you're obviously just curious generally about Lily as a founder, go and check her out on LinkedIn. But yeah, Lily, it's been a lot of fun. Thanks so much this morning. I think it's been a really kind of humble and kind of raw, open conversation, which I really enjoyed.
No, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me here.
Thanks very much, Lily. Have a good morning.